The word trail is odd. It means following behind. But when you get on a trail, you're moving ahead. Ahead of your worries, ahead of life's dramas, ahead of noise and fuss and distraction. Good trails show you the way. The best trails show you our way. Your Huron-Clinton Metro Parks, where we've got 250 miles of trails just waiting to be discovered. They're your Metro Parks. Come out and see what you find.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin momentarily. Please enjoy the following message from our sponsor.
Business is changing. Competition can come from anywhere, but so can opportunity. And when our clients are ready to rise, Citizens is ready too. When revenue targets move up, we're ready to step up. When new markets open, mergers beckon, strategies shift, we're ready to listen, to think like owners. Because we know what they know, business won't change itself. Citizens Commercial Banking, made ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 State of the Region presented by Citizens. Please welcome the Midwest Regional Executive of Citizens, Jim Maltz.
Thank you. Thank you. We're out of practice, obviously, on our cue because we were just talking, socializing in the back room. And usually we're on Zoom, and the last year and a half, 2 years, it's been a challenge to do these events. But looking out at the crowd, I can feel the energy, love the noise. So why don't you give yourself a round of applause for being here? You know, we've been doing this State of the Region. We're very lucky and very fortunate to be a part of this for several years now. And so I really want to thank Sandy and the Detroit Regional Chamber team for giving citizens the opportunity to be a part of this great work every year that the Chamber and his team does. So a round of applause for the Chamber, please. So there's a shot clock up here for those you can't see it. So speaking of shot clocks, even though I'm from the Buckeye State, I do have to say go blue in the tournaments. So go blue. Go Big Ten. So congrats to the women's and men's basketball team, and hopefully there'll be good news to follow in the next coming days. So that wasn't so bad. I feel good. So as citizens, we believe in smart, data-driven decision-making, and this report provides crucial information that can help regional businesses and civic leaders benchmark Detroit's progress and identify tomorrow's challenges. Citizens has a deep commitment to the Detroit region and the state of Michigan. We have a strong presence here with an experienced team of commercial and consumer bankers working closely with our customers. And I'm happy to report we are growing. We recently added 2 veteran bankers to our commercial team here in Southeast Michigan, and some members of the team are here today with us this morning. I would like to ask those folks to stand, please. Thank you. Thank you for all you do, not only for citizens, but also for the region here. I also specifically want to ask our newest member of the team to stand, Yasmin Jaycee. Some of you know this, that we announced her as our new Michigan leader for the Michigan commercial bank market across the state. So Yasmin, welcome. I believe it's day 4. And day 2, by the way, was her birthday. So I believe she said she turned 28 or 9, I think. So well, congrats. We love to have you. You're going to do good work, not only for us, but certainly for the community here. So obviously the last 2 years have been challenging. There have been some unexpected twists and turns on the road to recovery from the pandemic. But as Detroit has been making solid progress, so has Citizens. In the past year, we expanded our customer base by acquiring HSBC's East Coast branches and its national digital bank. And we just received regulatory approval for our acquisition of New Jersey-based Investors Bank. With this acquisition, Citizens now will be close to $215 billion in total assets. making us one of the larger banks in the United States. Very proud of that fact as we continue to grow. And for our business clients, we expanded our mergers and acquisitions advisory team and added equity capital markets capabilities last year with the acquisition of San Francisco-based JMP Group. And the bank also acquired Chicago-based Willamette Management Associates to bolster our business valuation team, and they're located in Chicago. We can offer our customers a complete set of solutions to meet our financial needs, and we are coming up with new ideas every day. We foster an innovation culture where we encourage and fund products and initiatives to help simplify our customers' lives and improve their financial well-being. That's our ultimate goal. As a company, we are also really focused on our environmental, social, and governance goals. We believe that businesses can only thrive when our communities thrive, and we're happy to be a part of this market for so long and look forward to future great things as well in our community. To that end, we partner with the Greening of Detroit, grow Detroit's young talent and focus hope on programs to prepare adults and youth for sustainable employment, which is really front and center in today's world. We also work with the Great Lakes Business Council to strengthen and grow women and minority-owned businesses, and we support the efforts of United Way and others to address the digital inclusion, which is essential for economic inclusion. Because as we all know, the pandemic widened the digital divide for many families. It's a serious issue everywhere we go. Through our longtime partnership with Gleaners Community Food Bank of Southeastern Michigan, we support Gleaners' Hunger-Free Summer campaign, an annual effort that provides more than 2 million, let me say that again, 2 million nutritious meals to children over the summer while they are out of school. Very, very, very thankful for that. We are encouraged by the resilience and progress that we have witnessed, some of which is highlighted in the report you'll hear soon. Our journey to recovery from the pandemic has had some expected twists and turns, but I believe that we are headed in the right direction and that together we can face any challenges that remain in front of us. At Citizens, we will continue to serve as partners and trusted advisors to our customers, and as we aim toward recovery and an even better future of opportunity and economic prosperity for Detroit. Again, I really want to sincerely thank and appreciate Sandy and his whole team of professionals at the Detroit Regional Chamber to give us another opportunity to be part of this wonderful event and to be part of this great report that you're going to hear soon. So thank you, Sandy, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see a crowd. It's great. Thank you.
Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Barua.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 8th annual State of the Region report by the Detroit Regional Chamber. And obviously, this is different this year. We have upgraded our technology. We've moved from 2D to 3D. So it's great to see everybody in person. Love that you're here. I know we're all, or many of us, are still kind of emerging from our COVID-driven bunkers and basements, and so we're just kind of slowly peeking our heads out. So for those of you who have been living in Zoom world and are still living in Zoom world, and this is one of your first forays out into the real world, first of all, welcome. And secondly, thank you for wearing pants. We know that it's been a while, and I know if you're anything like you, my dry cleaners have shrunk all my pants. Obviously, I didn't do anything, but, so anyway, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. I want to start with some very special hellos and welcomes. And first and most importantly, I want to thank so much Charlie Evans for being our keynote speaker today. And I also want to say, yeah, please. Yeah. Charlie, most people, some people may not know this, but this is Charlie's last year in his role as president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago role. And Charlie, I just want to say thank you for an amazing career. Thank you for your incredible service to this nation, to the Federal Reserve. I'm honored to be one of your board members, and it has just been a joy and a real honor to work with you and the team and contribute. So thank you so much for being here. Look forward to it. I'm also delighted that my friend Roop Raj from Fox 2 News Detroit is here today, and Roop is going to be our moderator for a conversation with Charlie in just a little bit. So Roop, thanks for your friendship. Thank you for all that you do for our community. Just a couple quick shout outs. I want to acknowledge Rick DeVore. I don't know where Rick is. He's got about, there he is right there. So this is Rick's last week. I know you're going to say as the head of PNC here, but more importantly, as you all know, this is Rick's last week as a Detroit Regional Chamber board member before he takes on this really incredible and important role as the new president of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan. Rick, congratulations. We're so excited for your leadership there. I want to briefly acknowledge Joe Anderson of TAG Holdings. Joe is just leaving now as the chair of the Detroit branch of the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago. So Joe, thank you for all of your leadership. And I also want to thank my boss, the president and CEO of Henry Ford Health, Wright Lassiter III. Wright, thank you so much for all that you do. And this is by far not the most interesting event that Wright will do today. As many of you know, in just a couple hours, Wright will be honored by Crain's as the Newsmaker of the Year. So congratulations, Wright. And of course, my thanks to Jim Maltz, the Citizens team. Thank you for the incredible partnership. Citizens has been our partner in crime in this endeavor, State of the Region, for, gosh, I think 5 or 6 years now. So I just really want to thank the Citizens team and Jim personally for his leadership. So thank you all very much. So obviously, thanking our sponsors is a great way to start. So in addition to our friends from Citizens, who are our lead member sponsors for this event, I want to thank our regional stakeholders, the Farbman Group and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I also want to thank our regional leader partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Comcast Business, the Huron-Clinton Metro Parks, and the Rocket Companies. Everyone, please thank our sponsors. So for our friends at home who are still perhaps not wearing pants, or at least wearing their fuzzy slippers, this is being live streamed. Everyone in the room has a hard copy report in front of them, but if you're playing along at home, please know that you can find this report easily online at the website on the screen. So the State of the Region is just one of the signature data reports produced by the Detroit Regional Chamber, and we take our role as the leading data source for the business community exceptionally seriously. So in addition to our State of the Region report, which kind of started our whole data journey many, many years ago, on April 6th, we will see the annual State of Education and Talent report, which will actually be in this exact same room on the 6th of April. Annually, our Mish-Auto team, which is our statewide automotive industry cluster association. And I want to recognize Lisa Lunsford, who is the chair of the Mish-Auto board, who's here today. The Mish-Auto team annually produces the State of Automobility, which is used by the MEDC, the governor, and others, plus all the automotive businesses in the area, that really documents and captures all the key data around the automotive and mobility industry right here in Michigan. Quarterly, we do a Detroiter magazine, and each theme of the Detroiter magazine is backed up with lots and lots of data that is in that issue. And always on, of course, is the Detroit Regional Data Center, which is available to all and has thousands of data points which are constantly being updated in real time through multiple sources, and would certainly encourage you all to use it as you conduct your business. So let's dive in. Let's start with the big picture of where our economy is today. So let's start with some good news. Population is up, folks. Across the state of Michigan and across southeast Michigan, our population is up about 2% in this last decade. Now, that may not sound like, huge news, but it is news that we haven't heard in this region and this state in a long time. So let's celebrate the fact that our population is up both across the region and across the state. Now, a couple big caveats. Number one is that other states are still growing faster, so we are losing a congressional seat. That's a problem. And also, because of some of the changes that were enacted with the 2020 census moving more online, it happened right during the pandemic. There were staffing challenges and funding challenges for the census. Hard to count communities were even harder to count. And officially, and I underscore officially, the city of Detroit experienced about a 10% decline in official population over the last decade. But I think we should all take that number with a big asterisk. So let's look at gross domestic product. We all know that the economy bottomed out in the spring of 2020, but it has shown surprising resilience and strength literally just right after the bottoming out. And what's surprising is that unlike other past economic crises, Michigan is more than keeping up with the national peers. And in fact, depending on how you look at it, the data time series are a little bit different between the national data and Michigan's data, but Michigan is at least holding its own, if not doing better, in terms of keeping up with the national recovery, which is quite strong. Per capita income, a very similar story. We are seeing per capita income across the state of Michigan not just keep up, but frankly exceed where the national levels are. So our per capita income in the region is up over 7%. That's good. And what's also good is lower paid industries are seeing more of an increase in their pay than others. So let's take hospitality, for example. The hospitality industry across the Detroit region is up over 13% in terms of their pay, and that's good news for our lower paid workers. Good news also as well on the unemployment rate. While we, across Michigan and in the Detroit region, not quite where we were before pandemic, we're definitely in the same zip code, and we're not exactly where the U.S. is, but we're really, really close. So, in the past, we've all heard the phrase that when the United States gets a cold, Michigan catches the flu. That is not the case this time around. Now, if we break out unemployment by education levels, we certainly see something different and some interesting things. First of all, the unemployment rate for the college educated, those with a four-year degree or more, essentially is back exactly where it was pre-pandemic. For those without a four-year degree, they're still lagging just a little bit. But some things are, unfortunately, still the same, and that is that, if you only have a high school degree, you are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed than those with a four-year degree, and that's regardless if we're at the height of a pandemic or if we're in good times. That number seems very, very stable. And as I mentioned earlier, wages for high school only or lower skilled workers are holding up quite well. The high school only workers up 9.4% in terms of their wages compared to 6.7% for those with just a college, with a four-year degree, excuse me. So we're seeing, again, some higher bumps in those lower skilled areas. So let's take a look at some specific impacts driven by the pandemic. So first of all, let's start with some good news. According to Bloomberg, using Bloomberg's analysis, which includes the unemployment rate, personal income, housing prices, the stock values of our publicly traded companies, Michigan's economy has recovered the best of all the large states in the nation. There's what they consider 2 million or more, 37 states. Michigan is at the top of that heap in terms of its resiliency throughout the pandemic. Again, that is not something we would have seen in previous economic crises. Private sector jobs, and this is a story that those of you, you're all business runners, you're all working in businesses, you're seeing this, right? We have not recovered the number of jobs yet. People aren't yet back to their jobs. We're about 2.5% lower in terms of the number of jobs that we have out there than we did prior to the pandemic. So, but what we are seeing an increase in is in postings. So there's been a 41% increase in 2021 for job postings. So we're seeing this dichotomy, and people talk about the labor crunch, right? This is a great example of the labor crunch. Overall jobs down 2.6%, but postings up 41%. So that shows, where our employers are really struggling to get people back into their offices and manufacturing facilities, et cetera. Labor force participation. For those of you who've been to this event before, we always hammer on this issue. Labor force participation rate across the nation has been a challenge, but Michigan has even more of a challenge. So Michigan's labor force participation rate, we're 40th in the nation. That's not a good ranking. We are lower than where we were prior to the pandemic, and we continue to be lower than the national average. We all know, we've all seen, and many of us have experienced the Great Resignation, people voluntarily leaving their jobs. Here's some data to back up what we're all seeing on the nightly news. In 2021, there were 33% more resignations than in 2020. And we saw more resignations in 2020 than we did in 2019. So people are voluntarily leaving their jobs at a record level. In fact, April of last year, there were almost 160,000 people who voluntarily resigned, left, which was a record high. So we are definitely seeing this. And we know why folks are leaving the workforce. Early retirements are a big piece of this, helped by a lush stock market. People are making lifestyle changes. People are concerned, COVID's not over yet, right? People are concerned for health purposes, coming back to the office or the manufacturing plant or the restaurant, wherever they may work. Childcare is a huge issue, especially for single mothers, but families are finding an incredible hard time getting appropriate childcare. So while we talk a lot about, and we've used examples of manufacturing facilities, restaurants, about how the labor crunch is occurring and how it's impacting businesses, I want to talk about a nonprofit. So hopefully here, everyone is familiar with the Empowerment Plan. Yes? Okay, okay, great. There we go. It's like, why don't we make sure everyone's awake? So the Empowerment Plan provides employment and training for individuals who are experiencing homelessness to manufacture these innovative and life-saving sleeping bags that turn into coats, or is it coats that turn into sleeping bags, to aid the homeless. So the CEO of the Empowerment Plan is here today, and Veronica Scott, please stand up. Thank you, Bo. So, Veronica created the Empowerment Plan when she was at CCS, right here in Detroit. And I was talking to her the other day, and I literally just casually, I asked this question, what's your staffing situation? Kind of expecting a very different response than I would expect if I'm talking to, someone in manufacturing or hospitality. And her answer was exactly the same. So I asked her to describe it for me, and Veronica, I hope I get this right. So let's start with the fact that COVID has driven an increase in our fellow citizens who are homeless. So the homeless problem has risen because of COVID. But the shelters that have been, taking care of our homeless citizens, their capacity dropped dramatically, by half, sometimes even more. And you know why. Social distancing, COVID rules. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. But if you are a nonprofit focused on, taking people who are homeless and training them and providing them then job opportunities at the Empowerment Plan, and if your pool of workers and associates are from the shelters, your pipeline of incoming talent has now just been slashed, just like everybody else's. And so then that creates a constraint on the number of sleeping bag coats that they can make to serve this increased homeless problem. So it's not just, for-profit companies, it is, it's nonprofits, even a very, very unique nonprofit. So thank you, Veronica, for sharing that story. But I do want to end on a good note for this particular section. We all know home prices are up. A lot of us refinanced our homes over the last couple of years. 25% increase across the region since 2019. So, where are consumers? What are consumers thinking? So let's take a live look of where consumers are right now and how they are feeling. So, and this just proves that there is a Simpsons GIF for every situation. Charlie, I want you to recommend to Chairman Powell that I think the FMOC meetings would be far enhanced if there were more Simpsons GIFs used in that setting. And I will share this slide with you, of course, that you can take. So, many of you know the Chamber engages in statewide polling on a regular basis with the Glengarriff Group, which is our polling partner. And our latest statewide polling shows that 63% of Michiganders believe that the economy is on the wrong track. Clearly, people are discontent. Why are they discontent? You know the answer to this question. Inflation. 90% of respondents say that inflation is a huge concern to them. And that, that concern is not misplaced. When you look at the Consumer Price Index, it is high. It hasn't been this high in 40 years. In fact, some of you in the audience aren't old enough to remember when it was this high. Some of us are. Some of us are also old enough to remember when people used to finance Chrysler K cars at 17% a year. Consumer sentiment also shows, consumer sentiment is not just down compared to the pre-pandemic levels. Consumer sentiment is just about where it was during the Great Recession. So think about that, a dozen years ago. So that really shows that consumers are cranky. But what's really interesting, and the Chamber talks about this a lot, there is a big disconnect between what consumers are feeling and saying how they feel versus how they're behaving. So if you ask consumers about themselves, 74% of them say, I am better off or at least the same as I was prior to the pandemic. Only 16% are concerned about losing their job. And both of these numbers are really stunning by Michigan standards. And in Michigan, consumer spending is up 24%. So that shows, a real confidence amongst consumers to keep spending, especially on goods and durable goods. But it also explains some of the inflation that we're seeing, especially in the manufacturing sector, and why we're seeing constraints in supply lines. And also another reason why people are unhappy and feel like the country's on the wrong direction, it's this concept of the fading American dream. And there's multiple ways to look at, how do you define the American dream? But one way to define the American dream is that, me as a child, I will live a better life economically than my parents did. If you look at this chart, and I know you need your bionic eye for this one, back in 1940, 90% of children lived a better financial life than their parents. If you fast forward today, that's down to 1/2. Okay, reasons for optimism, and yes, there are reasons for optimism. This is one of my favorites. New business starts. New applications for businesses are off the charts. They have been off the charts really since the spring of 2020. Now, this is important because new business starts is a huge indicator of future business, future economic health, and it's also very different than what happened after the Great Recession, where we were upside down on business burst and business death. This is a very, very different situation and quite positive. Small business. I would say that we have better news on the small business front. I wouldn't necessarily say we have great news on the small business front. So back in May of 2020, 65% of small businesses here in Michigan said that we as a small business, we're seeing major impacts. That's now down to 24%. We've seen significant progress there, and we're seeing employment tick up over 5% over the last year in small businesses. Another reason for optimism is the Purchasing Managers Index. This is a key index that we look to see what is the health of future orders in the manufacturing sector. This too is off the charts. incredibly strong, incredibly high, shows a real strong demand by consumers for future orders for durable goods. And building activity, single-family, multifamily homes across the Detroit region is very, very strong, the strongest it's been since 2017, and that has grown throughout this pandemic period. Now, one of the things that we have been talking about at the Chamber and am really committing to in earnest is really looking at things through the lens of equality, because inequality impacts us all. And so this is part of the Chamber's racial justice and economic equity work and commitment. We have stood up a dedicated website devoted to racial justice and economic equity issues. We have a specific data site just focused on data points around racial justice and equity. We have developed a set of programs just to really do our part to address racial inequities across our region. We now have a board committee that was just earlier this year voted on by our board to oversee all of our economic justice and equity work. And we have a new partnership with the Gallup organization, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But thanks to our friends at Detroit Future City, which is led by Anika Goss, who couldn't be with us this morning, we have some really sobering data points regarding the city of Detroit and equity. So the median income in Detroit is only 1/2 of what it is across the broader Detroit region, just 1/2. And of the largest 100 cities in the country, Detroit ranks 99th in terms of entrepreneurship. And while 60% of us across the region live in middle income, middle class neighborhoods, only 5% of Detroit residents live in a middle class neighborhood. And as we talked about education outcomes and earlier, only 17% of Detroiters have a bachelor's degree or higher. Huge, huge, huge racial equity work that needs to be done. Thanks to our friends at the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago, we have this sobering data point. We know that the black population in the city of Detroit is about 80%, but only 10% of businesses in the city of Detroit are owned by a black American. And while home prices in Detroit have risen 30%, great news, home ownership is on the decline for both black Americans and all Detroiters as a whole, roughly 53% to about 47, 48%. So home ownership in Detroit is sliding. And as I mentioned, we have this new partnership that we're very excited about with Gallup, and specifically the Gallup Center on Black Voices. And I want to introduce two friends of ours, representatives from the Gallup organization that we've been working with for the last couple of years, who are in from the Chicago office, Justin Lahl and Whitney Dupree. Justin, Whitney, thank you so much. They've been fabulous partners. Gallup has made a 100-year commitment to survey black Americans in a very unique way. And so for the first time, America will have year over year, apples to apples, detailed survey data on black Americans. And we are now working with Gallup to bring the power of that survey work to Detroit and the region. But we're not doing it alone. We're doing it with Detroit Future City. We're doing it with Data Driven Detroit, New Detroit, United Way, the Skillman Foundation, the Fisher Foundation, and many, many more. So, as we wrap up, what do we look forward to? Challenges ahead, we know what they are, right? The talent shortages, they're not going away soon, anytime, folks, I'm sorry. The ongoing racial inequities, this impacts us all, and it is a huge drag on the economic growth for all of our businesses and for all of our communities, not just in Detroit, but frankly, across the country. Increasing interest rates, and I'm anxious to see how Roop and Charlie talk about what might be happening with interest rates. And of course, again, folks, you know, COVID isn't over, right? You know, we're in this kind of awkward transition. We're in the teenage years of COVID, right, where everything is a little bit awkward. We're in this awkward phase between, okay, it's really no longer a pandemic, but it's not quite an endemic, and no, you know, a lot of people don't know quite how to adjust to it, understandably. So there's a lot of adjustment that needs to happen. But on the positive side, consumer demand is high, folks. Consumers are confident. These new business applications, again, I keep stressing that is such a huge positive outlook for our economy. Large-scale investments across this region, you know what they are. You know, everything from the Gordie Howe Bridge, the Hudson side, to, you know, Michigan Central train station, and so many more. They are on track. None of those went away, and hopefully we'll see a little bit of easing of the workforce challenges. So with that, I want to thank you for your kind attention. I know that was kind of the Evelyn Wood speed reading version of the report. And now I am looking forward to a conversation with Charlie Evans and Roop Raj. Thank you all very much.
The next portion of the program is sponsored by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
You know your business better than anyone. And the Michigan Economic Development Corporation has more ways to help your business in Michigan than everyone. Getting to know us can help you build stronger connections, expand into bigger markets, and gain access to new investors. Big, small, global, or local, the MEDC can help your Michigan business like nobody's business.
Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Charles Evans.
Thank you very much. All right, I guess I'm going to do that. Thanks very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Sandy, for the excellent presentation on economic developments in the region. And I'm delighted to be invited to speak to the Detroit Regional Chamber this morning. This is the first time I've ever followed Sandy in a presentation, and I can tell he's a tough act to follow. You know, I've got a rather dry speech that I probably need to try to punch up after that nice humor that he injected. Chicago Fed has been very fortunate to have you, Sandy, on our board, branch board, since 2017, and been very grateful for your many contributions, among which, of course, are your keen insights on Detroit and Michigan economies, as we've just heard. So thanks so much. These and other information we pick up from business and community leaders. Many at events such as this are very important inputs into how I go about thinking about monetary policy and preparing my advice when I go to Washington for Federal Open Market Committee meetings. Before I begin my formal remarks, I want to acknowledge the substantial hardships the Ukrainian people are enduring as a result of Russia's invasion. This is just an awful event, and may the people of Ukraine and all who are affected by the crisis remain strong and as safe as possible. And I should also note that these are my own views and not those of anyone else in the Federal Reserve. Although the COVID-19 virus has taken a horrible toll on the health and livelihoods of so many people, the U.S. economy recovered rapidly in 2021. This progress is remarkable given how dire an event the pandemic has been. Households and businesses showed amazing ingenuity in finding ways to operate safely. The healthcare sector was able to develop and deploy vaccines extremely rapidly. We were extremely fortunate to have Wright Lassiter on our board in Chicago, and as the vaccines were still just a promise, a dream that we were expecting, he and my now chair, Helene Gale, informed us that it wasn't just going to be the production of the vaccines that was important, but it was actually going to be the take-up, the acceptance of vaccines. And I have to say, I did not expect that. I'm not sure I believed that. Good advice, and oh my gosh, it was right on target. And that's just another example of the great kind of commentary that we've gotten for our Federal Reserve intelligence. And fiscal policy and monetary policymakers have provided crucial support through our policy actions for the economy. By the second quarter of last year, real gross domestic product in the United States had surpassed its pre-pandemic level, and despite new waves of infections during the second half, growth of the year was a quite robust 5.6%, and the economy appears to have entered 2022 with solid momentum. As for the labor market, after peaking near 15% early in the pandemic, the unemployment rate declined quickly and now stands at a very healthy 3.8%, within shouting distance of the low 3.5% we experienced before the COVID crisis. Here in the Detroit area, the contours are similar, as we just heard. In the midst of the shutdowns, the local unemployment rate soared to almost 24% in April 2020, much higher than the national average. Although they were both so incredibly high, it's hard to tell the difference between 14 and 20. I mean, the human toll is great. As the economy reopened and growth picked up, the unemployment rate has fallen quickly here, and this improvement is really very impressive. If you just look at the national unemployment rate, the labor market appears to have largely recovered from the pandemic. And the labor market is tight by a number of other measures, such as unfilled job openings in businesses and the rate at which people quit their jobs for other opportunities. I know many of you in this room are dealing with the difficulties of hiring and retaining the workers that you need. However, the number of people actually employed is still well below pre-pandemic trends, as many workers who left the labor force during the pandemic have not re-entered the labor market. This is especially true of older workers who have retired. By some estimates, in the absence of the pandemic, we would have expected the labor force to be 1.9 million higher than it is today. As the pandemic recedes further, strong labor market conditions will likely draw many of those sitting on the sidelines back into the workforce. This should help alleviate some labor market pressures, but the timing and extent of this return are open questions. Businesses are adjusting to these labor challenges in a number of ways. One thing that makes this complicated is that the pandemic may have also permanently altered many work arrangements. A wide array of job features are in play. Take, for example, some conversations I recently had with business leaders located in small and medium-sized cities. On the one hand, a number of those running smaller operations talked about the difficulties they were having in retaining back office staff because these workers are being actively recruited for remote positions with larger employers in far-flung locations. On the other hand, an executive at a large manufacturer reported their company had recently hired back a number of high-skilled back office and digital staff who had left them to take remote positions at West Coast firms, but they had not relocated. The executive noted that employees have a desire for a more fulfilling in-person culture, and the firm had decided to increase salaries, and those were important considerations. And so it's going to be a very fluid type of situation until we see how it settles down. I find these anecdotes fascinating as they highlight the many different ways we could see the labor market structure evolve over time. Local business models that have worked in the past may not stand up to new technologies that we're learning how to employ much more effectively now. As of today, it's highly uncertain how it's all going to play out. The pandemic set in motion other significant changes as well. Let me describe a story that is that so many of you have been living with, and it's emblematic of the challenges that we're facing today. With people forced to spend more time at home, households shifted their spending from services, such as travel and dining out, towards goods, such as appliances for home improvement projects and consumer electronics. And many of these items contain a large number of sophisticated microprocessors. As you know, so do cars. And at the same time, expecting a severe and prolonged recession as of March 2020, automakers substantially scaled back their production plans and ordered fewer microprocessors which are used in motor vehicles. As it turned out, the demand for vehicles recovered much more robustly than most expected, but the automakers realized that they had lost their place in the queue for those chips. And higher margin electronics firms were able to absorb both existing chip inventories and new production, leaving fewer chips available for new vehicles. So like I said, this is a Detroit story, and inflation is going to emerge out of this. As a result of these shortages, auto and truck production has been severely curtailed. And with supply curtailed but demand still robust, motor vehicle prices have surged more than 23% over the past year. 23%. I think I could sell my 2007 car that I got back from my daughter for quite a good price. This is just one story, but in many areas we're seeing producers struggling with supply bottlenecks. In some cases, lean, just-in-time production processes have come under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously as the flood of demand has put logistics systems under immense strain. The result has been a surge in costs that have been passed through to higher prices for many items. And I've heard many of these comments from my directors and business reports, and Ron Hall is here, and I've heard, from him also in terms of inventories and just-in-time delivery. So it's just really beneficial to meet with groups like yourself and get that information. Well, this brings me to inflation. How many people remember inflation before the current period? And was it high inflation or was it low inflation? I'm told that if I was still teaching economics at a university, most of the students, for quite a long time had only had low inflation experience. They wouldn't understand high inflation. Well, here it is. We're understanding it now. Or we're experiencing it. Early last year, as activity began to normalize, prices for goods and services that were especially sensitive to the pandemic adjusted higher. However, as 2021 progressed, strong demand and continuing supply challenges, including shortages of workers in many sectors, resulted in prices rising across a broader range of goods and services. 2021 inflation was an uncomfortably high 5.8% and rose further to 6.1% in January. And of course, this is the personal consumption expenditure index that the Fed highlights. The CPI, which is a little more, most people are more accustomed to, was most recently reported at 7.9% for the last 12 months. And so it's extraordinarily high. And for people whose incomes have not kept pace, higher inflation is a real hardship. Now, it's important to step back and think about the economic factors behind the massive jump in inflation over the past year. After all, in February 2021, inflation was only 1.6%, below the FOMC's objective of inflation averaging 2% over time. We often hear commentary that today's inflation is the highest we've seen since the late 1970s and early 1980s. But our experience today is much different than that. Back then, overly accommodative monetary policy during the 1960s and the 1970s helped fuel a slow but persistent buildup in long-run inflation expectations. That's economist jargon for the underlying views of wage and price growth that get built into the psychology of households and businesses that feeds upon itself. Of course, this was the inflation that former Fed Chair Paul Volcker eventually had to address, beginning in the fall of 1978, with draconian measures which ultimately caused a very deep recession in order to break the back of double-digit inflation. In contrast, the pickup in inflation over the past year occurred rapidly and did so after more than a decade of below 2% actual inflation, with longer-run expectations remaining lower than what seemed consistent with our 2% objective. As I alluded to earlier, today's surge largely reflects real supply shocks and weakened supply chains and logistics in the face of strong, outsized demand for goods and diminished labor force participation. These have been the strongest forces underlying the past year's rapid increase. A broad takeaway I get from the data and discussions with business and community leaders is that markets are working to reallocate scarce resources to their most critical uses. A shift in demand back towards services, an increase in goods supply in response to higher relative prices and wages, and adjustments in business models to adapt to the evolving environment will eventually alleviate many of the supply-side pressures we face today. Yet, in many cases, it's going to be a complicated process. All that said, and as I noted earlier, since last summer, inflation has broadened out to a wide range of goods and services. This is a signal of more general pressure from aggregate demand on today's impinged supply. If monetary policy did not respond to these broader pressures, we would see higher inflation become embedded in inflation expectations, and we would have even harder work to do to rein it in. So monetary policy must shift to removing accommodation in a timely fashion, which is what you've seen in the last actions by and communications from the Federal Open Market Committee. Last week, the Federal Open Market Committee announced its decision to raise the federal funds rate target by 25 basis points to a range of 1/4 to 0.25%. Furthermore, we indicated we will begin reducing the size of our balance sheet at a coming meeting. The committee also released its quarterly summary of economic projections, which presents the FOMC participants' forecasts of key economic variables over the next 3 years and also for the longer run. The projections show that the median FOMC participant around the table expects the equivalent of 7 1/4 point increases in the federal funds rate target by the end of this year, and somewhere between 3 to 4 more quarter-point increases in 2023. All told, these increases would put the federal funds rate by the end of 2023 at a target range of 2 3/4 to 3%. This is a bit above the median long-run estimate of 2.4%, and so represents a somewhat restrictive policy stance. It's not enough just to know that we need to raise rates. We have to have an idea of how much we should raise rates, and we need a benchmark as to when is it accommodative, when is it neutral, when is it really biting and restricting growth and demand. This is the median projection among 16 policymakers, and there is a range of views regarding appropriate policy in the current environment. My own viewpoint is squarely in line with the median assessment. Even with this tightening of monetary policy, economic growth is expected to be quite good. For GDP growth, the median projection for this year is 2.8%, with growth moderating to near 2% in both 2023 and 24. The labor market is expected to remain quite strong as well, with the unemployment rate near 3.5%. From the end of this year through 2024, and that's really a sign of a vibrant labor market, especially if we get more people coming back into the labor force and achieving that lower unemployment rate. Now, this brings me to the big question for today: what about inflation? We should see a reduction in inflationary pressures as we continue to adapt to and better control the virus, as market forces work to reallocate productive resources, and as monetary policy tightens. The 2022 median forecast for inflation this year is still high at about 4.25%. But inflation is expected to moderate as we move through the projection period, eventually coming down to 2.3% by the end of 2024. I would note that the general contours of these Federal Reserve projections are shared by most private sector forecasts. These aren't just rose-colored glasses projections, and there's a wide dispersion too among my colleagues, but these are fairly mainstream views. Of course, there are risks. Needless to say, in the current environment, all forecasts are subject to a great deal of uncertainty and risks. Of course, two major sources of uncertainty today are the Russian invasion of Ukraine and waves of the virus that currently are hitting abroad. Both of these present upside risk to inflation and downside risk to growth, and we'll be monitoring their impact on the economy very closely. So let me sum up. Economic activity and employment continue to strengthen, while inflation remains well above our objective to steer the economy to our dual mandate goals of full employment and 2% average inflation. The Fed has begun to reduce the degree of monetary accommodation. Our recent quarter-point rate hike was the first of what appears to be many this year. But with all the uncertainty we face today, policymakers need to be cautious, humble, and nimble as we navigate the course ahead. Monetary policy is not on a preset course. Each meeting's decision will be based on an assessment of economic and financial conditions at the time, as well as the risks to the economy. But all of our decision-making will be squarely focused on achieving the Federal Reserve's mandated policy goals of maximum inclusive employment and inflation that averages 2% over time. Thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Joining Mr. Evans on stage, please welcome the 5 p.m. anchor of Fox 2 News, Roop Raj.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. How are you today? Everyone doing well? Wasn't that great? Put your hands together for Mr. Evans once again. That was great. It is so good to be back, and I know we said this, and Sandy, I'm just going to echo your sentiments to be back at an in-person event. I was talking to somebody earlier, and they said, you know, you could do this on Zoom. but the human interaction and that feeling and that the aura you get from other people just can't be matched. So the energy in this room is alive and energetic, and so is the city of Detroit. Things are looking good, even though we had some sobering looks, of course, at some of the things and some of the work that needs to be done. So let's begin with Mr. Evans talking a little bit about what Fed Chair Jerome Powell just said the other day. On Monday, he was quoted after being interviewed by the press as talking about not just the 0.25 percentage points, but rather even going so far as to say, look, we may have to increase to a 0.5 percentage point. He said that Monday. We had it on our news. We talked about it in the newsroom. We said, how likely is that to happen? Little did I know I'd be sitting next to you a few days later. And so I ask you the question, when you talk about going from a 0.25 percentage point a few times in the year and instead going to a 0.5 percentage point, how likely is that?
Well, I think, as I remember reading about that comment, I think he was asked, is there anything in the way of the Fed increasing rates by 50 basis points instead of just 25? And I think he said, no, there's nothing in the way of that at all. Now, I think the key message, that I was trying to deliver was, we've got monetary policy right now at a setting that was extremely appropriate for the pandemic, for high unemployment, very low inflation because the bottom had dropped out of a lot of activities and there were a lot of slack resources, but then things picked up, and now it's just extremely clear that things picked up and it's going to be not as transitory as we had hoped. There's a lot of reason to believe these won't be permanently higher prices, but it's taking a lot longer and there are many things involved. So we need to move up to something, at least get close to neutral, and there's a general question as to why can't we get there quicker? Yeah. If your goal is to get to neutral and then decide, you could do it a little more quickly. And I think there are, some, commentaries that are, quite supportive of that type of view. My own view is that, given the pressures that I see, I would be comfortable with just each meeting increasing by a 0.25 point. That gets us to 1 3/4 to 2% by the end of the year. I also expect that we would continue that into March, and so that by our next March meeting, when it's completed, we'd be at neutral or just a little bit beyond that. I think we still need to have a little time to assess the supply chain, the bottlenecks. Is it going to improve? Have we seen the worst of it? Is it going to get worse? We don't know what the Russian invasion of Ukraine is going to mean for energy prices and things like that. The reduction in global demand that is likely to come about because of geopolitical concerns would have also some kind of effects on the U.S. And so I just think that we want to be careful, we want to be humble and nimble, and get to neutral before too long. Maybe a 50 helps. I'm open-minded about that. I really think the larger discussion is getting to neutral and then being able to look around and see, yes, maybe that's good, maybe we need more, maybe there's something else on.
It's interesting. We were so spoiled by these low interest rates and these short-term rates that...
Did you like those?
We enjoyed them. I bought a house 2 years ago. Are you kidding me? We loved it. It was great. But, you think about the fact that we're talking about increasing rates and then basically throwing back to 2019, and those were pretty good rates too. I mean, the rates, even when we increase them by a 0.25 percentage point, we're not talking about anything extreme, even over the course of a year, wouldn't you say?
It is the case that interest rates are, not nearly as high as during times like the 70s and the 80s when inflation was very high and there were reactions to that. Now, the danger is that inflation, gets embedded in expectations and it becomes more difficult to get down to where it should be, close to 2%. And so we're nervous about that. But you're absolutely right. The overall level of interest rates right now continues to be relatively low, certainly modest. And that's been the case for like the last 15, 20 years. We've sort of noticed this secular decline in interest rates around the world. Part of that is a long-term reduction in inflation around the world, so that leads to lower interest rates. And the other part is the aging of the population around the world is limiting growth opportunities so that repeatable growth year after year after year is much closer to 1 3/4 Maybe it's even less. That was our estimate before the pandemic. And back in the 80s, it was like 3.25 when we were growing. Growth solves a number of problems, and 1.75 is really quite modest. And if we continue to struggle with labor force issues, all of the labor input, concerns, employment concerns that you hear from businesses, there's going to be challenges to business models because of the aging of the population. Every year it's gotten worse, and now I think we're seeing some of that. So interest rates are lower. We're going to have to raise them in order to keep up with getting inflation where it's supposed to be. But when we've got 2% inflation, I still think that the overall level of nominal interest rates is going to be a lot lower than it used to be.
I want to steer this conversation into two directions at two separate times here. One towards the geopolitical issues you're talking about relative to the war in Ukraine, but also talk about small businesses. So many people who are in the audience here either lend to small businesses, have an interest in small business, and there has been a tremendous impact on them. But when we talk a little bit about Ukraine for a moment, and it feels trite with a roof over our head and food on the table and a hot coffee in our hand to be talking only about the economy, the humanitarian crisis that's happening there is primary and foremost. But as we take a look at the future, and you mentioned oil, you mentioned energy prices, how else does the unrest in that region affect us with our economy here in the U.S.?
Well, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sort of changed, the way countries are going to be dealing with each other for quite some time. I mean, what you just described, we've got a roof over our heads, we feel extremely safe. Even if we're nervous about, various things that are going on in the U.S. economy or, in the country, we feel really quite safe. What they're experiencing in Ukraine and in other parts of the world over the last, 10 years is just not something that we can fully appreciate, I think. And the response is, because this has been such an outrageously aggressive act, unprovoked, we have to rethink, apparently, the administration and NATO and other countries are coming together, impose sanctions on, the Russian economy, and that's going to change our interactions. And it's difficult to imagine how you unwind that, in this context. So, I'm very nervous about that, and, I'm just like everybody else. I don't have any special knowledge about this at the moment, and it just feels so uncomfortable to kind of say, I still think the U.S. economy is going to grow quite well.
Right.
And the labor market's going to continue to improve, and even though, every time we kind of look at the details of this and you kind of say, well, U.S. exposure to these countries through trade is usually relatively modest, and so you get small expected effects. It's only when things really pick up and something, another shoe drops that you go, oh gosh, this is really going to have a big effect or something like that.
And of course, like you said, you're watching like everybody else, as we are in the media, to see what happens next. And we're all hoping and praying for the same thing you are, which is some form of resolution and more peace in that region for sure. You mentioned leaders need to be more cautious, humble, and nimble. And you mentioned that now twice. What does that look like? What does that mean to you specifically when it comes to policy?
Well, I have, I'm somebody who kind of feels reasonably confident in, taking stock of where the U.S. is, where growth is, how monetary policy should be set. I studied this in graduate school. I've done research on it. I've been going to FOMC meetings for a long time before I got to the table and, did that.
You're kind of a big deal now as the Chicago Federal Reserve president too, right?
I'm now the longest serving person at the table, anyway. But, things have just changed a lot, and, you have to kind of go, I might not, things that I felt really comfortable with 6 months ago, 3 years ago, things have changed. And that's part of the benefits of our large committee. Right now we've got 16 people around the table sharing views, and no matter how confident Charlie Evans is, I really benefit when I listen carefully to everybody else, especially when they have different views coming to me, and understanding the challenges that small businesses have, the labor market. It's just extraordinary the way technology has always been, for the longest time, technology has been available. And many of our workers have kind of said, can I work from home? oh, that's just too hard. Nobody knows how to make that work. Then you go through 2 years of we must make this work. And now you can't say we don't know how to make it work. We did make it work. As a matter of fact, when you go back to the office, you realize I don't have as much bandwidth for everybody that everybody individually had at their home.
That's true.
So, I mean, there are just lots and lots of challenges, and these are feeding into our current inflationary pressures, the supply shocks that we've had, logistics, supply chains, the ports being overwhelmed, Amazon, a lot of goods are delivered on my residential street as opposed to going to the grocery store. Things have just changed so much. I really benefited a lot from listening to people and pausing and stopping and going, I think I need to think about this a little more carefully.
Well, one person who listens carefully to the constituents in his group is Brian Calley with the Small Business Association of Michigan. Had the chance to speak with him not long ago, and he was very concerned about a couple of things when it comes to small businesses. One, purchasing power. We talk about these inflationary concerns that all of us have and that General Motors and Stellantis and all of these other even banks have. But my goodness, if you're a small business on Main Street, you've talked to a lot of those businesses in your district. Talk for a moment about how sustainable this is for them relative to purchasing power and staying afloat.
There's a tremendous amount of diversity of experiences depending on your business line, right? So if you're a brick and mortar retailer, you've been under pressure for quite a long time. Now when people can't come into your shops for a long period of time and you've got a lease, and how does that get worked out? Your cost of goods is going up, So I mean, all kinds of challenges there. If you're a small business doing IT consulting or some type of consulting, that's a different world. I think everybody was extremely nervous in February and March 2020 when you didn't know how it would play out, and then all of a sudden you kind of find out who the winners are. Selling furniture. People need to fill out their home because they're going to be staying there a lot more, right? That's worked out a lot better. Opening a restaurant, not so good. So I mean, a lot of challenges, and I think people are fatigued by all of this too. So workers who have had to show up, essential workers. They wouldn't get paid unless they showed up. I think, it takes a toll. And so it's, in some sense, you can rationalize pretty easily that people want to take a break. They don't want to go back and do that kind of work maybe, and they should be paid more for it if they have to do it. And I think a lot of small businesses, the margins are very thin, right? They're constantly on the cusp of this isn't going to be a good year. I don't know how well this will play out. So raising prices isn't necessarily going to work out for them. Higher costs are going to be bad, and it's challenging.
When you also hear about a statistic like I think the SBAM is also saying that the labor participation rate in the state of Michigan is just below 60% right now. And then you hear, from Sandy's report with the state of the region that 74% of the people polled believe that they're doing okay. There seems to be a lot of numbers out there, and it's hard to get a really accurate glimpse of what's happening and what will happen. What are your main concerns about those numbers?
Well, I think there is sort of a disconnect when you look at the consumer confidence, numbers, and many types of surveys like that. People are, much gloomier than the current state of the economy, and the fact that a lot of those quits are people who quit and then they started another job the next day. My son was in that category, right? He was, working in a hotel, and he switched to another hotel, and, it was an attractive proposition, that type of thing. But there are a lot of people who aren't able to work, or not able to work the kind of jobs that they want, and so that's challenging. But the unemployment rate is low. You can go out and get a job. There was a lot of fiscal support when we needed it, so it could have been so much worse. In fact, it was pretty good for a lot of people, and so I think the overall level of uncertainty is just so high that people are really nervous about that.
We only have about 20 seconds left, but since this is probably one of your final speaking engagements in your current role, you're a relatively young guy here with a lot of experience, longest serving in your role right now. What's next for you?
Well, that's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. I'm like so many Fed retirees. It's like, I've always known that retirement was going to come, and it's like, what is that going to be like? I look forward to, staying engaged and, keeping active, and I'll just have to let you know when I find out more. It's kind of hard at this point.
Well, you'll hear it on Fox 2 first. We thank you for your time.
All right, very
maybe
good.
I don't know, Fox 32 in Chicago will learn about it from us, our sister station there. Right. I got to tell you what an honor and a pleasure it was to talk to you today. Put your hands together for Charles Evans, ladies and gentlemen. So good to be with you. Thank you for having us as well, and thank you. You did a great job. Thank you so much.
Business is changing. Competition can come from anywhere, but so can opportunity. And when our clients are ready to rise, Citizens is ready too. When revenue targets move up, we're ready to step up. When new markets open, mergers beckon, strategies shift, we're ready to listen, to think like owners. Because we know what they know, business won't change itself. Citizens Commercial Banking, made ready.
The word trail is odd. It means following behind. But when you get on a trail, you're moving ahead. Ahead of your worries, ahead of life's dramas, ahead of noise and fuss and distraction. Good trails show you the way. The best trails show you our way. Your Huron-Clinton Metro Parks, where we've got 250 miles of trails just waiting to be discovered. They're your Metro Parks. Come out and see what you find.